remember we had our heart, and heart was giving rise to arteries. What was the name of the arteries? Arc of
Aorta,
aorta and
pul-
pulmonary trunks. So right now we are not going to discuss about the pulmonary trunk or the heart itself. We will discuss about the arc of aorta. Uh, if you remember the first class when I told you about the mediastinum and everything, this is the sagittal section of the thorax. So you must have remembered I had told you there is an angle known as sternal angle, and a plane passing from sternal angle divides mediastinum into superior and inferior surface. And मैंने बताया था that is at the level of lower border of T4 vertebrae and sternal angle. Okay, so I had told you one peculiarity: your arc of aorta will begin and that will end at this level. बस इतना याद रखना है तुम्हें यहाँ पे. Now let's see our arc of aorta. Our arc of aorta, first of all, this is your left side, this is your right side, okay? And this is your neck, and this is your hands, okay? Onto the left side, the arc of aorta will give rise to left subclavian. Subclavian means this will be below the clavicle, and below clavicle क्या होता है? First rib. So subclavian artery will be present beneath your clavicle, above your first rib, okay? Then you will have your left common carotid artery. I am not teaching you the neck, otherwise मैं तुम्हें बताता ये carotid triangle इनका relation carotid sheath क्या होता है. It's just because you can pass your with control. And on to the right side, you have brachiocephalic. See, brachio means arm, cephalic means brain. So this has two parts. It means this will divide into one part which will supply the brain, that is carotid part, and the one part which will supply your arm, that is your subclavian. So let's name it left subclavian artery, left common carotid artery, brachiocephalic artery. You won't say left brachiocephalic or right brachiocephalic because you just have one brachiocephalic, okay? Then you have right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. पहले हम इस पार्ट को देखते हैं, सबक्लेवियन आर्टरी, ये वाला जो आर्टरी है. So again, this is your arc of aorta. Let's draw our clavicle. You know your clavicle is anteriorly convex, posteriorly concave. So let's draw your clavicle. And this is your first rib. Don't consider कि anatomically accurate होगा, but try to understand मैं यहाँ पे क्या point समझा रहा हूँ. Your left subclavian will arise from arc of aorta. It will be present below your clavicle and above first rib. And this is the reason why you can see the sulcus for subclavian artery on the inferior surface of clavicle and the sulcus for subclavian artery on the superior surface of the first rib. For example, if I want to show you here, let's just open Google. First rib superior view. So can you see there is something called as subclavian groove. That groove is specifically because वहां पे से pass कर रही है subclavian artery. Okay, so if this is your first rib, you can easily see something which is passing above it. Okay, एंड ये वाला जो पार्ट है दैट इज सबक्लेवियन ग्रूव ऑन टू द फर्स्ट रिब. इसी वजह से मैं ना सिस्टमैटिक वे में पढ़ाता हूँ, स्पेसिफिकली कार्डियोवैस्कुलर या ऐसे नहीं पढ़ाता हूँ. रिमेंबर वन थिंग, subclavian artery starts from arc of aorta and ends where? When it crosses your first rib. As soon as it crosses the first rib, it becomes axillary artery. Axillary artery is a content of armpit. So axillary artery is the artery of axilla or the armpit. Now, when this axillary artery, if you see, suppose this is you, this is your neck, first rib. So as soon as this crossed this part of the first rib, this became what artery? Axillary artery. Now this axillary artery will be going into your hand. But when it crosses this muscle known as TD's major muscle, the axillary artery becomes brachial artery. So see, subclavian artery arises from arc of aorta and ends where? At the outer margin of the first rib. It was present inferior to clavicle, that's why subclavian artery. Then from the outer margin of the first rib to the inferior border of TD's major muscle is your axillary artery. Why axillary artery? Because this is present in your axilla. Then from the lower border of TD's major muscle to your entire hand, this artery is known as brachial artery. Brachial artery, brachium का मतलब क्या होता है? Arm. That is why. अथर इतना समझ में आया? Can I proceed to the further division of the arteries now?
Yes.
So let's see our subclavian artery right now. So एक चीज हमेशा याद रखना, subclavian is present between clavicle and first rib. So if this is the subclavian artery, इसका impression किस पे होगा? Inferior surface of clavicle, superior surface of first rib. See, our teaching the cardiovascular of entire body will make sense if you are revising. ऐसे तुम खुद से पढ़ रहे हो starting from the beginning, it doesn't make sense. That's ridiculous. Well, let's start subclavian artery. So this is your subclavian artery. Now there is a muscle known as scalenus anterior muscle. I will tell you about all the muscles in the neck. Scalenus anterior, medius, minimum, whatever, all those muscles मैं बताऊंगा तुम्हें. देखो if you see ऐसा तो नहीं है ना कि arteries for example, just a minute, just try to understand in this correlation. Suppose this is national highway and this gives rise to state highways. You can see, roads के width कम हो जाते हैं, markings different हो जाती हैं. But what about the arteries? Arteries are almost same everywhere except for the capillaries. How do you know कि वो different, like तुम्हें कैसे पता कि यहाँ से लेके यहाँ तक axillary artery है, then brachial artery है? How do you know? The only and only way to say is the boundaries. For example, from the arc of aorta to the first rib, subclavian artery. From the first rib to the TD's major muscle, that is your axillary artery. From TD's major to your arm, that is your brachial artery. So you won't have, like if you are an anatomy student and if you are doing the dissection, you won't be presented with the artery जिसके ऊपर नाम लिखा होगा. No, you will just have to see all those anatomical boundaries. तुम्हें देखना होगा वो कहाँ से pass कर रहे हैं. By that, and based on to that landmarks, हम arteries को ना further parts में divide भी करते हैं. For example, this subclavian artery coming from the arc of aorta, this is divided into three parts. A part which is present before the muscle, a part which is present after the muscle, and a part which is present posterior to the muscle. The part which is present before is known as prescalenius part. The part which is present after, the part of artery which is present after is known as postscalenus part. The part which is present posteriorly, this is known as posterior को क्या कहते हैं? Retro. Retroscalenius part. So our subclavian artery is divided into three parts: prescalenius, retroscalenius, and postscalenius part. Now, our subclavian artery gives rise to various branches. For example, remember this mnemonic: vitamin, यहाँ से आने वाला C, and यहाँ से आने वाला D. So just remember this mnemonic: vitamin C and D. V4, Athar, do you know?
No.
Vertebral. I4, internal thoracic. T4, thyrocervical trunk. C4, what is C stands for?
Carotid.
No, I told you common carotids are the branches of either the brachiocephalic or it is a direct branch. That is costocervical trunk. And T4, dorsoscapular. So let's write V is for vertebral. Don't worry, मैं बताऊंगा ना तुम्हें. इनफैक्ट नाम याद नहीं करनी पड़ेगी, खुद याद हो जाएगा. I4, internal thoracic. T4, thyrocervical trunk. And D4, dorsal scapular artery. See, if I'm saying a third blood vessel, it means this is a blood vessel inside the body of a third. So हर एक चीज का नाम का मतलब होता है ना. Similarly, in the anatomy, everything has a meaning. For example, first branch of the prescalenius artery, prescalenius part of subclavian artery, that is vertebral artery. Let's see. This is your skull. I'm sorry, I'm making it like an astronaut. This is your skull, and this is foramen magnum. If you remember, we had a vertebrae in the neck known as cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae had these structures. And what are the peculiarities of cervical vertebrae? Bifid spinous process and transverse foramen in the spinal. Sorry. Yes, transverse foramen in
Transverse.
the transverse process. So, if I draw the transverse processes of all the vertebrae here, C1, C2, C3, then C4, then our C5, then our C6, and C7. And here we had our subclavian artery, okay, from the arc of aorta. And here we had our scalenus anterior muscle. And here we had three arteries: vertebral, internal thoracic, and thyrocervical trunk. This vertebral artery will enter from here and it will go to this transverse foramen of the cervical vertebrae. And this will enter inside the skull. Similarly, onto the other side. Now, यहाँ पे कुछ चीजें हैं जो तुम्हें याद रखना है, मैं उसके बारे में तुम्हें बताता हूँ. First thing that you have to remember is that this will not pass through the seventh transverse process. It will not go through that. Okay? अथर तुम्हें ये पता चल गया ना vertebral artery क्यों कहते हैं? That is because this is passing through the vertebrae. Got it?
Yes.
And the specific reason why does it passes through the vertebrae is that suppose there is just blood vessel. It can be easily damaged, but if you surround it with the bone, now it has the protection from the bone. So that provides the protection because तुम्हें पता चलेगा बाद में that this is supplying the brain. मैं इसके बारे में तुम्हें बताता हूँ. Now see, your vertebral artery is divided into 4 parts. ये सारी चीजें इंपॉर्टेंट है, so please इस चीज पे फोकस करना. First part is from subclavian artery to C6 transverse foramen. That is first. Let's write it here itself. Let's just highlight them. This is your first part. Okay, just a minute. Okay, now we have our second part. Second part is inside our vertebrae or the part which is inside the transverse foramen of the cervical vertebrae. ये सारे देख रहे हो ना, ये foramens के अंदर है. ये वाले जो part देख रहे हो, this is inside the foramens of the transverse process. So we are talking about it. So let's highlight them. This is the second part of the vertebral artery. Then the third part is जब तक हम skull के अंदर नहीं गए. That is from the C1 cervical vertebrae to the foramen magnum. ये वाला part जो है, this is our third part. And then this is our intracranial part or the fourth part. Okay. इसे हम कैसे कह सकते हैं? We can see it as cervical part or cervical basal part. We can say it intravertebral part. इसे हम क्या कहते हैं? सब occipital part कह सकते हैं. And the fourth part can be called as intracranial part. इतना समझ में आया था?
Yes.
कोई डाउट है तो मुझे बताओ.